Have you ever noticed how the most important people in a building are usually the ones nobody ever looks at? Eleanor Vance knew this better than anyone. At 34, Ellie spent her nights wearing a faded, oversized blue jumpsuit, pushing a squeaky yellow cleaning cart through the gleaming, sterile hallways of Apex Vanguard. Apex was one of Chicago's top architectural and software engineering firms, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were made over imported espresso, and where people measured your worth by the designer label on your suit. To the executives who worked late, Ellie wasn't a person. She was just part of the furniture, a ghost with a mop. But behind her tired eyes and the messy bun holding up her hair, Ellie possessed a mind that could run circles around every Ivy League engineer on the top floor. She just didn't have the luxury of using it anymore. 2 years ago, a brutal custody battle and a mountain of crippling medical bills for her 7-year-old son, Leo, had wiped her out. Leo's severe asthma required specialty treatments that her insurance conveniently classified as experimental, leaving her drowning in a sea of copays and denial letters. She had traded her drafting software for a bucket of bleach because the night shift offered health benefits and allowed her to take Leo to his doctors during the day. She swallowed her pride, pushed down her genius, and scrubbed floors. I always thought that if you just put your head down and worked hard, people would at least treat you with basic human decency. But then you meet someone like Sterling Thorne, and everything you thought you knew about respect goes right out the window. It was a rainy Tuesday night, a little past 11 p.m. The 75th floor boardroom was still lit up like a Christmas tree. Sterling Thorne, the 30-something overly jailed son of the company's founder and the presumptive next CEO, was holding a crisis meeting. Sterling was the kind of guy who used words like synergy and paradigm shift to hide the fact that he hadn't had an original idea in a decade. He was currently pacing in front of a massive glowing smartboard displaying the blueprints for Project Orion, a billion-dollar commercial complex that was supposed to secure Apex's future. The problem was, the foundation algorithms kept failing in the simulations, and Sterling was losing his mind. Ellie was quietly emptying the trash cans in the corner of the room, keeping her head down, trying to be as invisible as society demanded her to be. Suddenly, Sterling slammed his fist on the mahogany table, knocking over his half-full venti iced Americano. The dark liquid shattered across the glass surface and dripped onto the plush cream-colored carpet. "Are you all entirely useless?" Sterling screamed at his team of exhausted senior engineers, his face flushed red. "I pay you 6 figures to solve problems, not to stare at a screen looking like deer in the headlights. This design is a disaster." He paused, breathing heavily, before his cold eyes snapped toward the corner of the room, landing directly on Ellie. "You," he barked, snapping his fingers at her like she was a disobedient dog. "Cleaner, get over here and do your actual job. And try not to spread it around, though I doubt you know the difference between cleaning and making a mess." The room went dead silent. The engineers looked away, too afraid for their own jobs to defend a janitor. Ellie's chest tightened. A hot flush of humiliation crept up her neck, but she forced her jaw to relax. She had learned the hard way that anger was a luxury poor people couldn't afford. Without a word, she grabbed a roll of heavy-duty paper towels and her spray bottle, walking over to the mess. She knelt on the damp carpet, the cold coffee soaking right through the thin fabric of her uniform onto her knees. "Make it quick," Sterling sneered, stepping over her as if she were a puddle in the street. "Some of us are actually trying to build something important here. Not that you'd understand the concept of a complex structure. Just focus on the stains, sweetheart." He let out a dry, arrogant chuckle, turning his back on her. Ellie bit her inside cheek so hard she tasted copper. She methodically wiped the glass, her hand steady despite the tremor in her heart. She didn't look at him, she didn't snap back, she just worked. But as she stood up to wipe the edge of the table near the glowing smartboard, her eyes caught the intricate web of structural code and load-bearing schematics for Project Orion. She froze. To Sterling and his team, the blueprint was a chaotic puzzle they couldn't solve. To Ellie, it read like a simple children's book.
Her eyes traced the glowing blue lines, immediately spotting the cascading logic error hidden deep within the sub-basement stress distribution algorithm. They were miscalculating the lateral wind load on the secondary pillars. It was a rookie mistake, buried under layers of overly complicated code. Ellie let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. "The vector calculation on the load-bearing struts is inverted," she muttered under her breath, so quietly she barely heard herself. "You're feeding a positive integer into a negative feedback loop. The whole eastern wing will collapse under its own weight in the simulation." She blinked, realizing she had spoken out loud, and quickly turned back to her cart, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one in the room had heard her over the sound of Sterling's ongoing rant. No one except Arthur. Arthur was the 60-year-old night security guard, a retired Marine with a bad knee and kind eyes who was standing quietly just outside the open boardroom doors. He had been watching the whole exchange. Arthur was the only person in the entire building who asked about Leo, who knew Ellie took online coding courses on her 15-minute breaks, and who saw the fierce intelligence burning behind her quiet demeanor. As Ellie wheeled her cart out of the boardroom, keeping her eyes glued to the floor, Arthur stepped aside to let her pass. He didn't offer empty pity, he just looked at her, then glanced back at the glowing board, and then back to Ellie. "They're looking right at the answer, Elle," whispered Arthur, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "and they're too blind to see who holds it." Ellie gripped the handle of her cart, her knuckles turning white. She offered Arthur a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Doesn't matter, Artie," she whispered back, the weight of her reality settling heavy on her shoulders. But as Ellie pushed her squeaky cart down the dark, empty hallway, the numbers and codes from the Orion project kept dancing in her head, refusing to be ignored. They had the power, the money, and the titles, but she had the one thing they desperately needed, and for the first time in a long time, the invisible architect realized that being unseen might just be her greatest advantage.
Look, here's the thing about keeping your head down when you know you're the smartest person in the room. Eventually, your brain just rebels. It's like holding your breath underwater. Sooner or later, you have to gasp for air. It was Thursday, 2 days after Sterling's little coffee-throwing tantrum, and the 75th floor felt like a corporate graveyard. The Orion project was still bleeding millions in simulated structural failures, and the tension was so thick you could choke on it. Ellie was doing her usual rounds, moving silently past the glass cubicles, when she stopped at the desk of Julian Cross. Julian was Apex Vanguard's golden boy, the lead structural engineer. You know the exact type, always wearing those expensive Patagonia fleece vests over tailored shirts, constantly talking about mindfulness and synergy while ruthlessly stepping on anyone below him to climb the ladder. His desk was a disaster zone of crumpled blueprints and half-empty energy drinks. Right in the center, bathed in the glow of a sleep mode monitor, was a printed schematic of Orion's eastern wing, the problem area. Some engineer had circled the failing support pillars in frustrated red marker, leaving a trail of desperate, incorrect math in the margins. Ellie stood there, her cleaning rag in one hand, staring at the numbers. They were screaming at her. The error was so blindingly obvious, a cascading failure in the lateral wind load algorithm that would literally snap the building in half during a Category 3 hurricane. She tried to walk away. She really did. She thought about Leo sleeping at her neighbor's apartment, about the stack of final notice medical bills sitting on her kitchen counter, and about how invisible she needed to stay to keep her minimum wage paycheck. But the architect inside her, the genius that had been buried under 2 years of bleach and exhaustion, just couldn't take the stupidity anymore. Before she could stop herself, she picked up Julian's red pen. She didn't cross anything out. She just went to the bottom right corner of the blueprint and wrote out 3 lines of elegant, flawless equations. She rebalanced the load distribution vector in about 45 seconds. It was muscle memory. She dropped the pen, wiped the desk, and practically ran to the service elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She spent the rest of her shift terrified she was going to get fired for vandalizing company property. But she didn't get fired. Instead, she got hunted. The next night, Ellie was emptying the recycling bins in the break room when the door clicked shut behind her. Julian Cross was standing there, leaning against the doorframe. He wasn't angry. He was smiling. It was that polished, shark-like smile that people in power use when they found a new toy. He held up the blueprint with her red ink on it. "You know, Eleanor," Julian started, his voice smooth and low, dropping her formal name like they were old friends. "I spent 6 hours reviewing security footage to figure out which intern snuck into my office to fix my problem. Imagine my absolute shock when I saw the night shift cleaner leaning over my desk." Ellie's blood ran cold. She gripped the edge of her plastic trash bin, her knuckles turning white. She immediately went into survival mode. "Mr. Cross, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was doing. I won't touch anything again. Please don't report me to HR." Julian let out a soft chuckle, stepping closer, invading her space with the scent of expensive cologne and peppermint gum. "Report you, Ellie? Why would I do that? Do you have any idea what you wrote here?" He tapped the paper. "This isn't just a fix, it's a total paradigm shift. It saves the entire Eastern Wing." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her tired face, her cheap uniform. "I did a little digging today. HR files are surprisingly easy to access if you know the right passwords. Eleanor Vance, top of your class at MIT, former junior partner in a firm in Seattle before a rather nasty divorce and a sick kid drained your accounts and drove you out of the industry. Leo, right? Severe asthma?" Ellie felt like she had been punched in the stomach. The violation of her privacy, the casual way he weaponized her trauma made her want to scream. But she was trapped. She needed this job for Leo's insurance, even if the insurance barely covered anything. Julian read the panic in her eyes and expertly shifted his tone, playing the savior. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope, sliding it across the break room table. "Look, I'm not the bad guy here, Ellie. I know how hard it is out there. I see you struggling. The system in this country is broken, especially healthcare. It's a tragedy what happened to your career." He tapped the envelope. "There's $2,000 in cash in there. No taxes, no paper trail. That covers a lot of copays, maybe even that new nebulizer Leo needs." Ellie stared at the envelope. $2,000 was 2 months' rent. It was breathing room. But she wasn't stupid. "What do you want, Mr. Cross?" she asked, her voice hollow. Julian's smile widened. "Project Orion is a mess. Sterling is breathing down my neck. I need you to look at the rest of the foundational algorithms. Just review them. Fix the bugs. Leave the notes on my desk. You get cash to keep your kid breathing, and I get to keep my job. We're a team, a silent partnership." It was a deal with the devil. He was buying her brain for pennies on the dollar to save his own skin. Ellie felt a sickening wave of humiliation wash over her. She knew exactly what he was doing. But then she pictured Leo wheezing in the middle of the night, holding tightly to her hand while she prayed the cheap inhaler would work. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and took the envelope. "Only the foundational algorithms," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Julian beamed, looking like he'd just won the lottery. "You're a lifesaver, Ellie." The next morning, Ellie was buffing the marble floors in the main lobby as the daytime staff arrived. She watched from the shadows as Sterling Thorne and the executive board walked in, flanking Julian Cross. Julian was holding a sleek presentation folder, laughing confidently. "I was up all night, Sterling, but I finally cracked the Orion lateral load issue. I redesigned the entire vector matrix myself." Sterling actually patted Julian on the back, a rare sign of respect. "Brilliant work, Cross. I knew I kept you around for a reason. You're saving this company." They walked toward the private elevators, Julian soaking in the praise, completely ignoring the woman in the blue jumpsuit buffing the floor 10 feet away. He had stolen her genius, packaged it in a tailored suit, and sold it as his own. Ellie stood there, the heavy floor buffer humming violently in her hands. The injustice of it burned in her chest like battery acid. She wasn't a partner, she was a ghost funding their empire. She looked up and caught the eye of Arthur, the night security guard who was just finishing his shift at the front desk. Arthur had seen Julian corner her. He had seen everything. Arthur didn't smile. He just gave her one slow, deliberate nod, a silent acknowledgement of the war that had just silently been declared.
Julian thought he'd bought a desperate cleaner. He didn't realize he'd just handed the keys to the kingdom to an architect who knew exactly how to bring the whole building down.
You know what's actually worse than someone stealing your life's work? Watching them get a corner office with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan for it. Over the next 3 weeks, Julian Cross became the absolute golden boy of Apex Vanguard. It was sickening to watch. He was strutting around the 75th floor like he had personally reinvented the wheel, giving TED Talk-style speeches in the break room about harnessing your inner genius while sipping on $8 green smoothies. The board of directors practically threw a promotion at him, bumping him up to Senior VP of Engineering with a bonus check that probably had more zeros than I'd seen in my entire life. And me? I was still the ghost pushing the yellow mop bucket. Julian kept leaving those white envelopes in the supply closet for me. 1,000 here, 1,500 there. It felt dirty, like hush money. But when you're staring down the barrel of the American healthcare system, pride doesn't pay for your kids' rescue inhalers. I took the cash because Leo needed his meds, but every time I slipped an envelope into my cheap uniform pocket, a little piece of my soul chipped away. Julian started treating me less like a secret partner and more like a vending machine for brilliance. He'd leave Post-it notes on his keyboard before he left for the day. "Ellie, need the thermodynamic stress loads fixed by 6 a.m. Thanks." Like I was grabbing him a coffee. He genuinely believed he was doing me a favor, throwing me scraps while he feasted on my brain. But if Julian was a leech, Sterling Thorne was the salt on the wound. Sterling's arrogance only mutated and grew the closer the Orion project got to completion. He walked through the halls like a medieval king inspecting his peasants. One night, it was pouring rain outside, and I was buffing the hallway right outside his executive suite. Sterling walked out, talking loudly on his phone, and intentionally stepped right on to the freshly waxed section I had just blocked off with wet floor signs. He dragged muddy footprints all across the gleaming marble. I stopped the buffer and just looked at him. He didn't even break his stride or stop his phone call. He just glanced over his shoulder, snapped his fingers at the mud, and gave me this condescending little smirk that said, "That's what you're here for." He didn't see a human being. He saw a tool designed to clean up his messes. I remember standing there, my hands gripping the handle of the buffer so tight my joints ached, feeling this quiet, cold fury settle deep into my bones. That was the exact moment I realized that surviving wasn't enough anymore. The envelopes of cash were just band-aids on a bullet wound. If I kept letting Julian feed me scraps, I'd be scrubbing Sterling Thorne's muddy footprints for the rest of my life. I didn't just need to survive the game, I needed to flip the board. That night, instead of just fixing Julian's sloppy code and leaving, I sat at his desk and started digging deeper into the Apex Vanguard network. The Orion project wasn't just a building, it was a smart city infrastructure, a massive, interconnected neural network of architecture and software. Julian only had access to the structural partitions, but to really make Orion work, to make it flawless, you needed to integrate the architectural design with the core environmental servers. I was typing furiously, trying to bypass a firewall, when the heavy oak door of the office suddenly creaked open. I nearly jumped out of my skin, my heart dropping into my stomach. I spun around, expecting to see Sterling or a late-night manager ready to hand me over to the cops. Instead, it was Arthur. The old night guard stood there, his heavy flashlight resting against his leg, looking at the glowing monitors and then at me. I was shaking. "Artie, I can explain," I stammered, already mentally packing up my apartment, imagining Leo going to foster care. But Arthur just held up his calloused hand to stop me. He walked slowly into the room, his bad knee clicking slightly, and looked at the complex lines of code running down the screens. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his heavy-duty belt, unclipped his master keycard, the black one that granted access to every restricted sublevel in the building, including the physical server room, and tossed it on the desk in front of me. I stared at it like it was a live grenade. "They wiped out my entire pension back in the '08 crash, Ellie. 25 years of loyalty to a corporate conglomerate, and they dissolved my retirement fund to protect their executive bonuses. I lost my house, I lost my wife's peace of mind." He pointed a thick finger at the keycard. These suits up here, they fail upward. They break things, and people like you and me bleed to fix it. I've watched you for months, kid. I see you reading those MIT textbooks on your phone in the stairwell. I see how tired you are. Don't let them take your future, too." He gave me a hard, meaningful look. Camera feeds in the sub-basement server room go down for routine maintenance every night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. starting tonight. What you do in the dark is your business. Then he just turned and walked out, leaving the door perfectly shut behind him. I sat there in the silence, staring at the black keycard, realizing I had just been handed a loaded gun. From that night on, my life split into two distinct realities. From 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., I was Eleanor the invisible janitor, emptying trash, scrubbing toilets, and letting Sterling Thorne look right through me. But at exactly 2:01 a.m., I took the freight elevator down to the sub-basement. I'd swipe Arthur's black card and the heavy steel doors of the server room would hiss open, welcoming me into a sanctuary of humming cooling fans and blinking blue lights. Down there, in the freezing, hyperventilated air, I wasn't a maid, I was the architect. I stopped just patching Julian's mistakes. I bypassed his local terminal entirely and started rewriting the core infrastructure of Project Orion directly into the mainframe. I was building a masterpiece. I redesigned the thermal regulation logic, optimized the kinetic energy recycling grid, and balanced the load-bearing algorithm so beautifully it brought tears to my eyes. It was like composing a symphony in a language only I could hear. But I wasn't just doing it for the sake of the art. I was calculating. With every line of brilliant, company-saving code I injected into their servers, I buried a digital signature, a ghost in the machine, a highly encrypted, interwoven logic trap that tied the entire stability of the billion-dollar Orion project to one undeniable truth: my authorship. I was weaving my DNA into the very foundation of Apex Vanguard's future. I'd leave the server room at 4 a.m., my fingers aching and my eyes burning, grab my mop bucket, and finish my shift as the sun came up over the Chicago skyline. Julian thought he was using me to build his empire. Sterling thought I was just dirt on his shoes. But down in the dark, surrounded by the hum of servers, I was quietly, methodically rigging the entire building to answer to only one master. And they had absolutely no idea.
You know the funniest thing about corporate paranoia? It spreads faster than the flu in a kindergarten classroom. By Wednesday morning, the 75th floor of Apex Vanguard wasn't just an office, it was a crime scene of confusion. I was emptying the shredder bins near the executive suite, a task that always felt ironically symbolic when the panic started. Usually, the morning briefing is a boring affair of ego-stroking and coffee sipping, but today, the glass walls of the conference room were vibrating with shouting. Sterling Thorne was pacing so frantically I thought he was going to burn a hole in the carpet. Beside him, the head of cybersecurity, a twitchy guy named Kevin who looked like he hadn't slept since the dial-up era, was projecting a series of code streams onto the main screen. They weren't looking at errors anymore, they were looking at perfection. And it terrified them. See, the night before, I had rewritten the entire thermal regulation protocol for Project Orion. I didn't just patch it, I optimized it to run on 40% less energy by rerouting the heat waste into the building's own water heating system. It was elegant, sustainable, and frankly, brilliant. But to a room full of suits who only understand profit and control, unauthorized brilliance looks a lot like a threat. "I want to know who logged in," Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. "Systems don't just upgrade themselves, Kevin. We have a breach. Is it corporate espionage? Is it the Chinese? Is it a competitor trying to embarrass us by showing us up on our own server?" Kevin was sweating through his shirt. "Sir, that's the thing," he stammered, tapping his tablet with shaking fingers. "It's not an external breach. The IP address is internal. It's coming from the sub-basement nodes. But the encryption style, it's old school. It's clean. No bloatware. Honestly, sir, it's better than anything my team has ever written." The room went dead silent. Sterling stared at the screen, his face twisting between rage and greed. "So you're telling me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "that we have a phantom employee who is better at this job than the people I pay millions of dollars to?"
He slammed his hand on the table. "Find them. I don't care if you have to tear the drywall out. Find this Orion ghost. If they're an Emmy, we sue them into oblivion. If they're an asset, we own them." I was standing 3 feet away on the other side of the glass, spraying Windex on a smudge. I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. I just kept wiping, creating a clear view for them to look right through me. But inside, my heart was doing backflips. They were terrified of Orion, creating a myth out of a woman who was currently worried about having enough gas money to get home. But the real danger wasn't Sterling. Sterling was a sledgehammer, loud and blunt. The scalpel was Julian Cross. While the rest of the board was running around like headless chickens, Julian wasn't screaming. He was sitting at the end of the table, staring at the code on the screen with a look of dawning, horrifying realization. He recognized the syntax. He recognized the elegance. It was the same handwriting he had seen on the scraps of paper he'd been buying from me for weeks. He stood up slowly, excused himself from the meeting, and walked straight out into the hallway. I saw him coming. He didn't have his usual confident strut. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He cornered me near the service elevator, grabbing my arm a little too tight. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. "Eleanor," he hissed, checking over his shoulder to make sure no other executives were around. "The code on the screen, the thermal rerouting. Did you do that?" I looked at him with my best deer-in-the-headlights expression. I pulled my arm back, feigning confusion. "Mr. Cross, I don't know what you're talking about. I just cleaned the floors." Julian got in my face, his peppermint breath hot and aggressive. "Don't play dumb with me. That logic structure, it's identical to the load-bearing fix you sold me. If you're messing with the mainframe, if you're Orion, you need to tell me right now. Do you have any idea what Sterling will do if he finds out a janitor is hacking his legacy project? He'll bury you. He'll bury us both." This was the moment, the precipice. I could have folded, I could have admitted it, begged for mercy, or tried to leverage it. But I looked at Julian, this man who wore my genius like a borrowed coat, and I realized he wasn't angry because I broke the rules. He was terrified because I was better than him. And he knew that if I was exposed, his fraud would be exposed too. He needed me to be invisible just as much as I did. So I looked him dead in the eye, channeled every ounce of exhaustion and grit I had, and lied with the coolness of a sociopath. "Mr. Cross," I said, my voice steady and flat, "I don't know how to code a mainframe. I barely know how to use the time clock app. I helped you with some math on paper because I'm good at puzzles. But hacking? I'm worried about paying my light bill, not saving your company." I held his gaze until he blinked. He searched my face for a lie, but all he saw was a tired mother in a blue jumpsuit. He exhaled, a shaky breath of relief, and stepped back. "Right," he muttered, straightening his vest, convincing himself because he had to believe it. "Right, of course. Stick to the mop, Ellie. Leave the thinking to the professionals." He turned and walked back towards the boardroom, wiping sweat from his forehead. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of nausea and power. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was haunting them. I pushed my cart down the hall and past Arthur, who was doing his rounds. He didn't look at me, but as we passed, he tapped the side of his nose once, a silent signal. Clear. I knew what it meant. He had wiped the physical logs of my entry into the server room. We were ghosts in a machine built by people who didn't believe in ghosts. That afternoon, as I left the building, I saw a team of external forensic auditors marching into the lobby, carrying heavy cases of equipment. Sterling had called in the big guns. They were going to tear the digital infrastructure apart looking for Orion. I pulled my coat clighter against the Chicago wind, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. Let them hunt. They were looking for a hacker in a hoodie or a corporate spy in a suit. They would never, in a million years, suspect the woman who emptied their trash was the one holding the keys to their kingdom. The hunt was on, but what they didn't realize was that the prey was the one designing the maze.
You know that moment when a rubber band is pulled so tight that it stops stretching and just hums with violent energy right before it snaps? That was the entire 75th floor by Friday. The forensic auditors had been turning the servers inside out for 48 hours, and they had found absolutely nothing digitally. But they did find one physical discrepancy.
The security camera feeds in the sub-basement had systematic, unlogged blackouts, exactly 2 hours every night, and there was only one person in charge of those physical logs: Arthur. It happened right at 6 a.m. during the shift change. The grand marble lobby was packed. Daytime executives in their bespoke suits holding $5 lattes were filtering in, while the exhausted night crew was lining up at the time clock. I was buffing the floor near the security desk when the private executive elevator dinged. Sterling Thorne marched out, flanked by 2 massive corporate security goons and a pale HR rep holding a pathetic little cardboard box. Sterling didn't just walk, he stormed. He marched straight up to Arthur's desk. Arthur, who was sipping from a battered thermos, stood up immediately, his posture straightening instinctively into that rigid Marine stance he'd held onto since the late 70s. Sterling didn't even say good morning. He just slammed a printed report onto the desk. "You want to explain this to me, old man?" Sterling's voice echoed off the marble walls, drawing the attention of everyone in the lobby. 14 nights of missing security footage in the most sensitive sector of my building. You're either the most incompetent mall cop I've ever had the misfortune of hiring, or you're an accomplice to corporate espionage. Arthur didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, the deep lines around his eyes deepening, but he kept his voice steady and respectful. "Sir, the system is old. It glitches. I submitted a maintenance request 3 weeks ago." It was a lie, a beautiful, selfless lie to protect me. I froze, the handle of the floor buffer slipping in my sweaty palms. Sterling let out a sharp, barking laugh that held zero humor. "A glitch, right. You know what I think? I think you're a bitter, washed-up relic who's still whining about his 401k from the housing crash, and you let somebody into my servers to get back at us." Sterling snapped his fingers at the HR rep, who placed the cardboard box on the desk. "Badge, gun, keys, now. You're fired. And honestly, I'm contemplating having you arrested for trespassing just on principle." Arthur's hands trembled, just a fraction of an inch, but I saw it. This job was his lifeline. It was how he paid for his wife's dementia care. He reached for his badge, his dignity intact, but his spirit taking a brutal hit. And that was the exact moment the rubber band inside me snapped. I didn't even realize I was moving until I was standing between them. I dropped the heavy buffer, and the loud clatter made half the lobby jump. "He didn't do anything!" I yelled, my voice ringing out, raw and echoing in the cavernous space. Sterling blinked, genuinely startled for a split second before his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure disgust. He looked me up and down, taking in my stained blue jumpsuit, my messy hair and my cheap sneakers. "Excuse me?" he sneered, leaning in closer. "Did the furniture just speak?" I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I stood my ground, stepping right in front of Arthur. "I said he didn't do anything. The cameras glitch all the time. You can't just fire a veteran, a man who has given years to this company without proof, just because you're throwing a tantrum over some code you don't understand." I could hear the collective gasp of the daytime staff. No one talked to Sterling Thorne like that, ever. Sterling's eyes darkened, turning cold and dead. He stepped into my personal space, looking down at me like I was something he had scraped off his shoe. "Let me explain something to you, sweetheart," he whispered, but his voice carried, dripping with venom. "You are the absolute bottom of the food chain. You are the dirt we wipe off our shoes. You are a welfare case holding a mop, allowed in this building solely because someone has to clean up my garbage. Do not ever in your miserable, pathetic life think you have the right to speak to me, look at me, or tell me how to run my empire." He turned to the security goons. "Get this old trash out of my building. And as for you," he glared at me, "if I see your face when I come down for lunch, I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every cleaning service in Chicago. You'll be begging for change on the L train by Tuesday." I stood there, shaking with a rage so profound it felt like ice water in my veins. I looked around the crowd, desperately seeking a friendly face. My eyes landed on Julian Cross. He was standing near the elevators, holding his expensive leather briefcase. Julian, the man whose career I had just saved, the man who knew exactly how smart I was. I made direct eye contact with him, silently pleading for him to step up, to say something, to use his newfound power to stop this injustice. Julian looked at me, he looked at Sterling, And then he looked down at his perfectly polished shoes, gripped his briefcase tighter, and stepped backward into the elevator, letting the doors slide shut. The ultimate coward. Arthur gently put a heavy, weathered hand on my shoulder, breaking my stare. "It's okay, Elle," he rasped quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't do this. You need the insurance for Leo. Let it go. I'll be fine." He picked up his little cardboard box and let the guards escort him into the cold Chicago morning, his limp more pronounced than ever. Sterling smirked, adjusted his tie, and walked away like he had just swatted a fly. The lobby slowly went back to normal, people averting their eyes, quickly checking their phones, pretending they hadn't just watched two human beings get stripped of their dignity. I was left there standing alone next to a yellow mop bucket. But as I stared at the revolving doors Arthur had just been pushed through, the panic and fear about losing my job completely evaporated. They didn't just fire my friend, they took the last shred of my restraint. I realized then that playing nice, staying hidden, taking the crumbs doesn't protect you from monsters. It just makes you an easier meal. Julian wanted to steal my genius, and Sterling wanted to treat me like dirt. Fine. I slowly bent down, picked up the handle of the floor buffer, and parked it neatly in the closet. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to go home, kiss my son, and then I was going to detonate the logic trap I had built into the very heart of Project Orion. They wanted an empire. I was going to let them watch it burn.
If you've ever worked in corporate America, you know exactly what the death rattle of a failing company sounds like. It doesn't sound like alarms or screaming. It sounds like aggressive whispering behind frosted glass doors and the frantic clicking of expensive pens. By Friday afternoon, the 75th floor was in full meltdown mode. The board of directors had officially issued a do-or-die ultimatum. Apex Vanguard was bleeding capital, and a massive syndicate of Silicon Valley venture capitalists was flying in first thing Monday morning for a live, fully integrated simulation of Project Orion. If the sim crashed, like it had been doing for months before I secretly intervened, the investors would pull their funding. Apex would file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by noon, and Sterling Thorne's legacy would be reduced to a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Sterling was a wreck, barking orders at his reflection. But Julian Cross? Julian was a dead man walking. He had taken the credit for my sub-basement server patches, which meant Sterling fully expected him to write the final integration protocol that tied the structural algorithms to the environmental grid. It was the digital keystone of the entire project, and Julian didn't even understand the math behind it, let alone know how to code it. He was a fraud, staring down the barrel of Monday morning, and he knew there was only one person on Earth who could save him. He didn't corner me in the break room this time. He was too desperate for that. He waited until my shift ended at 5 a.m., ambushing me out in the freezing, sleet-covered alley behind the building where the dumpsters were kept. The Chicago wind was howling off the lake, biting through my thin jacket, but Julian was sweating right through his designer overcoat. He looked unhinged, his eyes darting around the empty alley like a cornered rat. "Ellie," he breathed, grabbing my shoulder and practically shoving me into the brick wall. "I need the final integration sequence, the whole thing, structural, thermal, kinetic, all of it, tied together and ready for compilation by Sunday night." I stared at him, my breath pluming in the freezing air, maintaining my best impression of a terrified, exhausted cleaner. "I told you, Mr. Cross, I don't know how to do that. I just helped you with some equations. What happened to Arthur? I can't be involved in this anymore. Sterling will destroy me." Julian let out a frantic, high-pitched laugh, digging his manicured fingers into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and shoved it against my chest. $10,000, Ellie. Cash, right here. That's a new life. That's Leo's medical debt wiped clean. That's a ticket out of this miserable alleyway. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a manipulative, coaxing whisper. "Sterling is an animal. I know that, but I'm not him. I'm looking out for you. We're in this together, right? You do this one last thing for me and you never have to touch a mop again. I'll make sure you're taken care of. But if you walk away now, Apex goes under and you're out of a job anyway. Think about your son, Eleanor. Be smart." It was the ultimate toxic American corporate hustle, weaponizing my poverty and my child's illness, packaging his own survival as a favor to me.
I looked down at the envelope pressed against my chest. 10 grand, a fraction of what Project Orion was worth, but to a single mother drowning in debt, it was a lifeline. I looked back up at Julian's desperate, pleading eyes. I didn't feel intimidated anymore. I just felt a terrifying, absolute clarity. "Sunday night," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. "Leave a laptop on your desk. I'll write the protocol, but after this, we're done. You never speak to me again." Julian's shoulders sagged in massive relief, a victorious, greedy smile spreading across his face. "You're a lifesaver, Ellie. I knew you were a team player." He practically skipped back toward the parking garage, leaving me standing in the sleet. I opened the envelope, thumbed through the crisp $100 bills, and shoved it into my backpack. I wasn't taking his bribe. I was taking my advance. But there was a massive problem. Arthur was gone, and my black master keycard had been deactivated when Sterling fired him. The sub-basement server room was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I couldn't use Julian's laptop on the 75th floor. I needed direct access to the mainframe to do what I was about to do. I walked back into the service entrance, my mind racing, when I bumped into Maria, the head of the night cleaning crew. Maria was a tough, no-nonsense immigrant from Pilsen who had been scrubbing these floors for 20 years. She knew everyone's secrets, and she despised Sterling Thorne with a burning passion, especially what he did to Arthur. She saw the look on my face, grabbed my arm, and pulled me into the laundry supply closet, shutting the door. "You look like you're going to a funeral, Chica," she whispered, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. "Arthur called me. He told me you're the one fixing their messes in the dark. He said they're trying to use you." I swallowed hard, tears of exhaustion finally prickling my eyes. "They are, Maria, and I need to get back down there to finish it, but I'm locked out." Maria stared at me for a long, silent second. Then, without a word, she reached under her heavy uniform collar, unclipped a solid red key card, the emergency override pass reserved strictly for the head of maintenance in case of a chemical spill, and pressed it into my palm. "Arthur was a good man. Sterling is a bedo," she said, her voice fierce. "Whatever you're building down there in the dark, make sure it bites them. I'll cover your zone this weekend." Armed with Maria's red card and Julian's 10 grand, I spent the entire weekend in the freezing sub-basement. I didn't just write the final integration protocol, I composed a masterpiece. I flawlessly synced the kinetic dampeners to the city's power grid, creating an architectural marvel that was light years ahead of its time. It was perfect. But I didn't just leave it there for Julian to steal. I wrapped the entire billion-dollar code in a customized logic trap, a digital dead man switch. I set the compilation parameters so that the moment Julian tried to execute the simulation live on Monday morning, the system would hit an invisible wall. It wouldn't crash, it would lock down, encrypting every single file, schematic, and blueprint across the entire Apex Vanguard network. The only way to release the lock and run the simulation was a specific command line override, a biometric and cryptographic key that existed in exactly one place: my brain. I was giving them the keys to the Ferrari, but I had completely rewired the ignition. Sunday night at 3 a.m., I hit save, wiped my fingerprints off the keyboard, and walked out of the server room for the last time. As I rode the CTA train back to my tiny apartment, watching the city lights blur past the window, my hands weren't shaking anymore. Julian thought he had bought a desperate janitor. Sterling thought he had eradicated the trash from his building. They had no idea that on Monday morning, the invisible architect was going to burn their ivory tower to the ground, and I was going to do it in broad daylight.
Monday mornings in corporate Chicago have a very specific, ruthless kind of energy. It's the smell of cold rain on concrete, the blaring of taxi horns, and the collective anxiety of a million people rushing to desks they hate to pay off debts they can't escape. But this particular Monday didn't feel like anxiety to me. It felt like absolute crystalline focus. I woke up at 6 a.m. in my tiny, drafty apartment, the radiator clanking in the corner. I made Leo his oatmeal, gave him his morning breathing treatment, and kissed his forehead before my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, came over to watch him for the day. He looked at me with those big, tired brown eyes and said, "You look different today, Mommy." I smiled, a real smile.
maybe the first one that reached my eyes in 2 years. "Mommy's going to fix some things today, buddy," I whispered. After they left, I went to the back of my closet and pulled out a heavy vinyl garment bag covered in a thick layer of dust. I hadn't unzipped it since the day the judge finalized my divorce, the same day the medical bills had officially swallowed my savings and my Seattle architecture firm had quietly let me go because I was too distracted by my son's failing health. Inside was a charcoal gray tailored Alexander McQueen power suit. I bought it back when I was a junior partner, back when I thought merit actually mattered. I slipped it on, the heavy, expensive fabric settling over my shoulders like armor. I pulled my hair out of its usual messy bun, brushing it out until it fell in sharp, dark waves around my face. I put on a slash of dark red lipstick. I looked in the cracked bathroom mirror, and the invisible, exhausted janitor was gone. Staring back at me was Eleanor Vance, the MIT graduate who could calculate load-bearing vectors in her sleep. I grabbed Julian's envelope of cash, shoved it into a sleek leather briefcase I hadn't used in years, and walked out the door. While I was riding the CTA Red Line toward the city, the 75th floor of Apex Vanguard was vibrating with a toxic mixture of expensive cologne and sheer panic. The Silicon Valley venture capitalists had arrived. These were the apex predators of the tech world, guys in their 40s wearing $600 pristine white sneakers and custom Patagonia vests, holding the fate of a $1.5 billion investment in their manicured hands. They were sitting around the massive mahogany table, sipping artisanal pour-over coffee, looking mildly bored, waiting for Apex to either blow their minds or go bankrupt. Sterling Thorne was pacing at the head of the table, his usual arrogant swagger replaced by a manic, sweaty desperation. He was laughing a little too loud at the investors' jokes, throwing out buzzwords like disruptive synergy and legacy infrastructure, desperately trying to project control. But the real show was Julian Cross. Julian was standing by the main podium, adjusting his silk tie, his iPad synced to the massive smartboard that dominated the room. He looked confident, cocky even, and why wouldn't he be? He had my code. He had spent the entire weekend looking at the perfect, seamless integration protocol I had handed him, completely oblivious to the digital guillotine I had hidden inside it. He genuinely believed that because he understood how to read the equations, he somehow owned the genius behind them. That's the most dangerous delusion of mediocre men in power. They mistake their privilege for actual capability. At exactly 9:50 a.m., I didn't walk around to the alleyway. I didn't go to the loading dock or the rusty service elevator that smelled like bleach and old garbage. I walked right through the towering revolving glass doors of Apex Vanguard main lobby. The morning rush had cleared out, leaving the massive marble atrium echoing with the quiet hum of money. I walked straight toward the VIP elevator bank, the heels of my leather pumps clicking sharply against the stone floor, echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. Marcus, the daytime security guard who had threatened to have me towed 3 weeks ago because my cleaning cart was an inch over the designated line, immediately stepped into my path. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I see your badge? You need an appointment for the executive levels," he said, holding up a hand. He didn't recognize me, not even a glimmer of recognition. To him, the woman in the blue jumpsuit wiping up coffee stains and the woman in the McQueen suit were two entirely different species. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even break my stride. I just looked him dead in the eye with a gaze so cold and authoritative it physically pushed him back a step. "I am the lead architect for Project Orion," I said, my voice dripping with the exact same elitist boredom I had heard Sterling use 1,000 times. "And if I miss this 10 a.m. launch because you wanted to play hall monitor, Sterling Thorne will personally make sure you never work in this city again." Marcus went pale, swallowed hard, and instinctively stepped aside, swiping his own MasterCard to open the VIP elevator for me. "My apologies, ma'am. Go right ahead." It's a sickeningly hilarious truth about America. If you walk like you own the building, people will literally hold the door open for you to steal it. The elevator doors slid shut, and the digital numbers started ticking upward. 50, 60, 70.
My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my mind was icy and absolutely still. 2 years of swallowing my pride, 2 years of scrubbing toilets, 2 years of watching men like Julian and Sterling take the credit, take the money, and take the dignity of people like Arthur. It was all boiling down to this exact minute. At exactly 9:59 a.m., the elevator chimed softly and the doors opened. The 75th floor was empty. Everyone who mattered was inside that boardroom. I walked slowly down the plush, cream-colored carpet, the same carpet I had spent hours agonizingly scrubbing on my hands and knees. Through the frosted glass walls of the boardroom, I could see the silhouettes of the executives taking their seats. I could hear the low hum of the projector fan kicking into high gear. I reached the heavy glass doors just as Julian tapped the microphone at the podium, his voice muffled but clear enough to hear the sickening arrogance dripping from every word. "Gentlemen," Julian announced, his chest puffed out, "what you are about to see isn't just a simulation, it is the culmination of my life's work. I give you Project Orion." I stood there, my hand resting lightly on the cold metal handle of the boardroom door, taking one final deep breath. Inside, Julian confidently reached out his finger and pressed execute on his tablet, completely oblivious that he hadn't just launched a simulation, he had just pulled the pin on a grenade, and I was the only one in the world holding the pin.
You know how they say right before a car crash, time seems to stretch out and you can see every single shard of glass suspended in the air before it hits you? That's exactly what it felt like standing outside that frosted glass door. Inside, Julian had his finger hovering over the glowing execute button on his tablet, his chest puffed out like a peacock in a Patagonia vest, soaking in the expectant silence of a room filled with Silicon Valley billionaires. He pressed it. For exactly 2 seconds, the massive smartboard at the front of the room went pitch black. I could hear the collective intake of breath from the venture capitalists, expecting a breathtaking 3-dimensional holographic rendering of the city grid to bloom across the screens. But it didn't bloom. It flatlined. A harsh, aggressive, blaring red light suddenly washed over the 75th floor. It wasn't an error message, it was a digital guillotine. The main screen flashed violently, throwing crimson shadows across the terrified faces of the Apex Vanguard executives before solidifying into a giant, unblinking black box with stark white monospace text. It didn't just lock the presentation. I had designed the dead man's switch to be absolute. The cascade triggered instantly, rippling through the entire skyscraper. Every single laptop in that room slammed shut digitally. The servers in the sub-basement cut their external uplinks. The room descended into pure, unadulterated chaos. Sterling Torn jumped out of his leather chair as if it had caught fire, his face instantly turning the color of a bruised plum. "Julian, what the hell is this? Fix it! Fix it right now!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a panic so raw it was almost embarrassing to witness. Julian was violently jabbing his finger into his iPad, his perfectly styled hair suddenly looking limp as sweat beaded on his forehead. I don't know. The compilation was perfect this weekend. The syntax was clean. I don't understand," he stammered, his eyes wide with the frantic terror of a fraud who has just been dragged into the light. One of the lead investors, a sharp, silver-haired tech titan named David Chen, pushed his useless laptop away and leaned back, crossing his arms with a look of lethal annoyance. "Is this some kind of avant-garde joke, Sterling? We flew 4 hours from Palo Alto to look at a firewall?" Sterling was hyperventilating, screaming for Kevin, the head of cybersecurity, who was already sprinting from the back of the room looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Kevin plugged a diagnostic cable into the podium, typed furiously for 10 seconds, and then stopped. He literally stopped breathing. He looked up at Sterling, his face ash white. "Sir, it's not a glitch. The entire Apex Vanguard mainframe has been encrypted. Military-grade lattice cryptography. We are entirely locked out of our own company." Sterling grabbed Kevin by the collar. "Who did it? Who hacked us?" Kevin just pointed a trembling finger at the giant red screen. The text had changed. A single blinking cursor pulsed like a heartbeat, followed by a message that commanded the room.
System lockdown initiated. Integration protocol rejected. Awaiting biometric and cryptographic override. Required authorization. Primary architect, Orion. That was my cue. I pushed the heavy glass doors open, and they hit the doorstops with a dull, authoritative thud that cut through the screaming like a knife. The room went dead silent. 30 pairs of eyes snapped toward the back of the room. I didn't rush. I walked in with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who owns the ground they are stepping on. The sharp click-clack of my heels on the hardwood floor sounded like a countdown. I watched their faces process my presence. The investors looked curious, assuming I was some high-level fixer or a forgotten executive brought in to save the day. But Sterling's eyes narrowed, squinting through the red glare. He recognized my face. He recognized the messy hair he had sneered at, the tired eyes he had dismissed, but his brain completely short-circuited trying to reconcile the woman who scrubbed his toilets with the woman wearing a $3,000 Alexander McQueen suit. For a second, he looked genuinely dizzy, and then his arrogance violently overrode his confusion. "Security!" Sterling bellowed, a vein throbbing dangerously in his neck. "Are you kidding me right now? Marcus, get up here! How did the night cleaner get past the lobby? You absolute lunatic! Are you out of your mind? You dress up in a stolen suit and waltz into my boardroom during a crisis? I will have you thrown in federal prison for trespassing." He was practically foaming at the mouth, stepping toward me to physically throw me out. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the floor. I looked right through him, the way he had looked through me for 2 years. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you, Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously low, but projecting perfectly across the silent room. His face froze in his tracks. The words didn't make sense to his elitist brain, but the absolute chilling certainty in my voice stopped him dead. The investors exchanged bewildered glances. David Chen sat forward, his eyes narrowing in intense calculation, instantly recognizing that the power dynamic in the room had just violently shifted. I kept walking, passing a paralyzed Sterling, and walked straight up to the podium. Julian was still standing there. He looked like a corpse. All the color had drained from his face, his jaw slack, his hands trembling violently. He knew. In that singular, terrifying moment, looking into my eyes, Julian realized that I hadn't just written the code for him. I had built a cage, locked him inside, and swallowed the key. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice cracking, a pathetic, begging sound. "What did you do? Why did you do this?" I didn't whisper back. I turned to the room. I reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out the thick manila envelope, and tossed it onto the mahogany table right in front of David Chen. It landed with a heavy, satisfying smack. "Gentlemen," I announced, "my name is Eleanor Vance. I graduated top of my class at MIT, specializing in kinetic architectural integration. Until 2 years ago, I was a junior partner at Kessler and Vance. And for the last 24 months, I have been working the graveyard shift emptying your trash cans to pay for my son's medical bills." I pointed to the envelope. "Last Friday, your senior VP of engineering, Julian Cross, cornered me in an alleyway. He offered me the $10,000 in that envelope to write the final integration sequence for Project Orion because he hasn't written a single line of original code for this company in 6 months. I am the one who fixed your lateral load vectors. I am the one who optimized your thermal routing in the sub-basement servers while you were all sleeping. I am Orion." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Sterling looked like he had been hit by a freight train. "You're lying," he gasped, but it sounded weak, pathetic, a dying gasp of a man losing his empire. "She's a crazy woman. She sweeps floors. Julian, tell them she's lying." Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He just stared at his shoes, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. He was completely, utterly broken. One of the lead investors, a sharp, silver-haired tech titan named David Chen, pushed his useless laptop away and leaned back, crossing his arms with a look of lethal annoyance. "Is this some kind of avant-garde joke, Sterling? We flew 4 hours from Palo Alto to look at a firewall?"
Sterling was hyperventilating, screaming for Kevin, the head of cybersecurity, who was already sprinting from the back of the room, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Kevin plugged a diagnostic cable into the podium, typed furiously for 10 seconds, and then stopped. He literally stopped breathing. He looked up at Sterling, his face ash-white. "Sir, it's not a glitch. The entire Apex Vanguard mainframe has been encrypted. Military-grade lattice cryptography. We are entirely locked out of our own company." Sterling grabbed Kevin by the collar. "Who did it? Who hacked us?" Kevin just pointed a trembling finger at the giant red screen. The text had changed. A single blinking cursor pulsed like a heartbeat, followed by a message that commanded the room. "System lockdown initiated. Integration protocol rejected. Awaiting biometric and cryptographic override. Required authorization, primary architect, Orion." That was my cue. I pushed the heavy glass doors open, and they hit the doorstops with a dull, authoritative thud that cut through the screaming like a knife. The room went dead silent. 30 pairs of eyes snapped toward the back of the room. I didn't rush. I walked in with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who owns the ground they are stepping on. The sharp click-clack of my heels on the hardwood floor sounded like a countdown. I watched their faces process my presence. The investors looked curious, assuming I was some high-level fixer or a forgotten executive brought in to save the day. But Sterling's eyes narrowed, squinting through the red glare. He recognized my face. He recognized the messy hair he had sneered at, the tired eyes he had dismissed, but his brain completely short-circuited trying to reconcile the woman who scrubbed his toilets with the woman wearing a $3,000 Alexander McQueen suit. For a second, he looked genuinely dizzy, and then his arrogance violently overrode his confusion. "Security!" Sterling bellowed, a vein throbbing dangerously in his neck. "Are you kidding me right now? Marcus, get up here. How did the night cleaner get past the lobby? You absolute lunatic. Are you out of your mind? You dress up in a stolen suit and waltz into my boardroom during a crisis? I will have you thrown in federal prison for trespassing." He was practically foaming at the mouth, stepping toward me to physically throw me out. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the floor. I looked right through him, the way he had looked through me for 2 years. "I wouldn't take another step if I were you, Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously low, but projecting perfectly across the silent room.
Let me tell you, there is no sound in the entire world quite like the deafening silence of a room full of arrogant men realizing they are completely, utterly powerless. I didn't stay to watch the immediate fallout. I kept walking down that plush 75th floor hallway, my heels clicking a steady rhythm, pressing the down button on the VIP elevator. My hands were shaking so hard I had to ball them into fists, the adrenaline crashing through my system like a tidal wave. I fully expected security to tackle me or for Sterling to come charging out of the boardroom throwing punches. But what happened next was so much sweeter, like something out of a movie, yet messier and infinitely more real. The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom burst open. But it wasn't Sterling who came running after me. It was David Chen, the lead venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, and trailing right behind him, looking like a man marching to his own execution, was Julian Cross. Julian's pristine, perfectly tailored composure had completely evaporated. He was sweating profusely, his face the color of wet cement, his eyes darting wildly. David Chen stopped a few feet from me just as the elevator pinged and the doors slid open. He held up a hand, not to stop me, but in a gesture of absolute respect. "Miss Vance?" Chen said, his voice dropping the corporate polite tone and shifting into pure, sharp business. "Before you get in that car, I want you to know 2 things. First, the syndicate's $1.5 billion funding is contingent entirely on you. If you walk out of this building and don't come back, we pull our capital by noon. Second, what is your number? Equity, salary, title. Name it, and I will personally draft the term sheet before you reach the lobby." I stood there, looking at this billionaire tech titan who was practically begging me to stay. But before I could answer, Julian lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of my Alexander McQueen jacket. He was crying, actual Desperate tears were streaming down his face, ruining his expensive cologne aura. "Ellie, please," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whine that echoed down the corridor. "Tell them it was a joint effort. Tell them I managed the project. I've got a mortgage in Lincoln Park. I've got a fiancé with expectations. You know how this industry works. If they fire me for plagiarism and gross incompetence, I'm blacklisted from Chicago to San Francisco. I'll lose everything. You know what it's like to lose everything, Ellie. You know how hard it is. Please, we were a team." It was the most disgustingly American corporate plea I had ever heard, a wealthy white man weaponizing my trauma, begging the woman he had exploited to save him from the consequences of his own mediocrity. I looked down at his hand gripping my jacket, and then I looked right into his red, panicking eyes. The anger I thought I would feel wasn't there. It was just a cold, heavy pity. "Take your hand off me, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it made him flinch like he'd been burned. He let go. "We were never a team. You were a parasite. And the only thing I know about losing everything is that it teaches you exactly what you're made of. We're about to find out what you're made of." Right at that moment, Sterling stormed out of the boardroom, flanked by 2 massive security guards. For a second, I thought he was going to have me arrested, but his face wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Julian. Sterling was practically foaming at the mouth, his legacy crumbling in real time. "Get him out of my sight," Sterling screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "Marcus, strip his badge. Take his company phone. Do not let him go back to his desk. Do not let him touch a keyboard. Just throw him out on the street." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The same security guards who had humiliated Arthur, the kind old veteran, were now grabbing Julian Cross by the arms. Julian started sobbing, actually sobbing, dragging his expensive Italian leather shoes across the carpet as they frog-marched him toward the freight elevator, the exact same elevator I used to haul my trash cart. "Sterling, wait! I gave you 5 years!" Julian wailed, but Sterling just turned his back. It was a brutal, beautiful display of karma. But Sterling's relief was incredibly short-lived. He turned to David Chen, plastering on a fake, sickly sweet smile, trying to salvage the wreckage. "David, listen, we don't need to be hasty. Obviously, Julian was a rogue element, but we have the code now. We have Orion. I can manage Miss Vance. We'll offer her a senior dev position, double her janitorial pay, whatever she wants. We keep this in-house under my direction." David Chen didn't even blink. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. "I think your father has a different perspective on who is managing whom, Sterling." Chen put the phone on speaker and held it up. The voice that boomed down the hallway was gravelly, old, and carried the weight of a self-made Chicago titan who built Apex Vanguard from a single brick-and-mortar storefront. It was Richard Thorne, the founder. "You arrogant, stupid boy," the old man's voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with absolute disgust. "I stepped down to let you build a legacy, and instead you turned my company into a frat house for thieves and sycophants. You fired a 20-year veteran security guard because you threw a tantrum, and you treated a goddamn MIT genius like a stray dog because you couldn't see past her uniform." Sterling's face drained of all color. "Dad, wait, I can explain." "Shut up," Richard barked, silencing his son instantly. "You're done, Sterling. As of this exact second, you are stripped of your title as interim CEO. The board is convening an emergency vote at 1 p.m. to formalize your removal. Pack your office. You don't manage Miss Vance. Nobody manages Miss Vance." The phone clicked dead. The silence in the hallway was heavier than concrete. Sterling stood there, completely hollowed out. He didn't scream this time. He just stared at the floor, the realization slowly washing over him that the empire he thought was his birthright had just been snatched away by the very person he had told to scrub his coffee stains. He looked small, pathetic. Stripped of his title and his father's money, there was absolutely nothing left of him. I turned back to David Chen, my heart steady, my vision perfectly clear.
I wasn't an underdog anymore. I was the architect of my own life. Chief Technical Officer, I told Chen, my voice ringing with a quiet, unshakable authority. A 20% equity stake in Project Orion, a corner office on the 75th floor, and full, comprehensive premium medical coverage for my son effective immediately, with no copays for pre-existing conditions. Oh, and one more thing. I glanced over at the security desk down the hall. You rehire Arthur. Give him back his pension with back pay and make him head of corporate security. David Chan didn't hesitate for a single second. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, and he extended his hand. Miss Vance, it is an honor to finally meet you. Welcome to the board. I shook his hand, stepped into the elevator, and as the doors slid shut on the sight of Sterling Thorne slumped against the wall, I finally, for the first time in 2 years, took a full, deep breath. The ghost was gone. The architect was home.
6 months is a funny amount of time. In the corporate world, it's just 2 financial quarters, a blip on a spreadsheet. But in real life, it's enough time to completely rewrite your destiny. It's spring in Chicago now. The ice on Lake Michigan has finally thawed, and the city has that electric, hopeful energy it always gets when the sun finally decides to show up. I'm looking out at the skyline right now, but not from the alleyway by the dumpsters and not from the freezing sub-basement server room. I'm looking at it through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office on the 75th floor. The gold lettering on the frosted door reads, Eleanor Vance, Chief Technical Officer, Lead Architect, Project Orion. But honestly, the title is just ink. The real victory is what's sitting on my desk. It's a framed photo of my son, Leo, taken last weekend at Navy Pier. He's smiling so wide his eyes are crinkling, holding a massive cotton candy. And the best part? He's breathing perfectly. No wheezing, no panic, no emergency inhaler clutched in my purse. The premium medical coverage David Chen secured for me covered the experimental immunotherapy treatment my old insurance called unnecessary. Leo hasn't had a severe asthma attack in 4 months. The crushing weight of medical debt that used to keep me awake, staring at the ceiling and praying for a miracle, is entirely gone. That's the thing they don't tell you about poverty in America. It's not just the lack of money, it's the constant suffocating anxiety. And finally, I can breathe, so my son can breathe too. People always ask me what happened to the men who tried to bury me. It's a classic American obsession, right? We want the bad guys to be marched out in handcuffs. But reality is a little more poetic than that. Sterling Thorne wasn't arrested. He was quietly, ruthlessly erased from his own empire. His father forced him to sell his shares back to the company at a fraction of their worth to avoid a public investor lawsuit. Sterling lives in a massive, empty penthouse, running a boutique consulting firm that everyone in the Gold Coast knows is just a fake LLC to give him a reason to put on a suit in the morning. He has all the money in the world, but he has zero power, zero respect, and he knows that every time he looks at the Chicago skyline, the brightest, most advanced building in the city was built by the woman he called Dirt. As for Julian Cross, the universe has a wicked sense of humor. Without my code to steal, his complete lack of actual engineering skill was exposed almost immediately. He was blacklisted from every major tech firm in the tri-state area. Last I heard, his fiancée left him when the Lincoln Park condo went into foreclosure, and he's currently working as a mid-level QA tester for a logistics company out in the suburbs. He actually has to clock in, sit in a cubicle, and write his own code. For a guy who thought he was Steve Jobs, being spectacularly average is a fate worse than prison. But my favorite part of this whole new era isn't the revenge, it's the redemption. The very first executive order I signed as CTO wasn't about software, it was about Arthur. I didn't just rehire him, I marched down to the security desk on my first official day, handed him a new badge that said Director of Corporate Security, and gave him the office right next to mine. Arthur didn't cry. He's a Marine, he's too tough for that. But his shans shook when I told him the company was back paying his stolen pension with interest. His wife, Mary, is now living in one of the best memory care facilities in the state.
Every morning at 7 a.m., before the rest of the executives arrive, Arthur comes into my office with 2 black coffees. We don't talk about the sub-basement or the night Sterling threw his tantrum. We just drink our coffee, look out at the city, and share that quiet understanding of 2 people who survived the storm together. He's the only one who knows my secret. In the bottom drawer of my massive, custom-built mahogany desk, hidden beneath contracts and blueprints, is a neatly folded, faded blue janitor's jumpsuit. I kept it. I will never throw it away. Because in corporate America, it is so incredibly easy to get to the top floor and forget what it feels like to be on your hands and knees scrubbing the marble. It's easy to start looking at people as numbers, as resources, or as ghosts. That jumpsuit is my anchor. It reminds me every single day that the most brilliant minds in this country aren't always sitting in boardrooms wearing Alexander McQueen. Sometimes they are pushing squeaky yellow carts. Sometimes they are guarding the front door on the night shift. Sometimes they are single mothers taking the bus at 4 a.m., swallowing their pride just to keep their kids alive. Society loves to judge us by the uniforms we wear, the titles on our LinkedIn profiles, or the balance in our bank accounts. They tell us that if we are struggling, we must not be smart enough or working hard enough. But I know the truth. I lived it. Greatness isn't defined by the suit you wear, the car you drive, or the pedigree of your university. True greatness is what you are capable of building in the dark, when no one is watching, when the world has completely counted you out. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was nothing, but they forgot one crucial rule of architecture. The most important part of any towering skyscraper, the only thing that keeps the whole empire from crashing to the ground, is the foundation. And foundations are always built in the dirt. Well, my friends, that brings us to the end of Ellie's incredible journey. From scrubbing floors in the dead of night to owning the skyline, she proved that true value can never be hidden forever. What did you think of Ellie's ultimate payback? Do you think Sterling and Julian got what they deserved, or was losing their pride the hardest punishment of all? And have you ever felt underestimated or invisible in your own life? I want to read your stories. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. If this story hit home for you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. Until next time, remember, keep building your foundation even if you have to do it in the dark. Your time to shine will come.